Helen Lee. I'm the author of The Missional Mom and the co-author of the forthcoming book, The Race-Wise Family, which will be out next year. And I've been asked to talk about raising race-wise families in a race-challenged world. Thanks for having me today. I come before you not as an expert. I am a parent. I am the mom of 3 teenage boys, and I am just trying to figure out this issue of race alongside all of you and all of your churches. But I do hope and pray there is some nugget of helpful information here that can serve you in your churches today. Well, I want to start with a bit of a confession. I don't know about you, but I am a sucker for a good awards show. Some of you may have watched the Oscars not too long ago, but my favorite awards show this year were the Golden Globes. And in that show this past year, there was a movie nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. That was the movie Minari by Lee Isaac Chung. It was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, even though the film is set in America, but that's another whole dialogue. But in any case, the movie won. And you might have seen this moment. It was replayed over and over on social media. It was the moment when Lee Isaac Chung's daughter started hugging her dad and saying, I prayed with all this joy and sincerity and enthusiasm. Who taught this little girl how to pray? Probably her parents, right? Christian parents, we know what it means to teach our children about certain areas of discipleship, whether that's prayer or worship or Bible study, serving, and all those things. But how often have we made talking about race and ethnicity a core part of our discipleship, both for our children or for our adults? How often have our churches really spoken about race and ethnicity as a regular part of their Sunday services and their public ministry? I mean, I think of all denominations out there, the Evangelical Covenant Church is likely more ahead in this area than most. But I know this is still a growing area, even for our denomination. I'm obviously a person of color, born and raised in the U.S., but my kids are experiencing a whole different ethnic identity journey themselves. I grew up hating the fact that I was Korean American, but from the time our kids were born, we've helped them celebrate their Korean ethnic identity, and we've taught them that that heritage is a gift. They have Korean middle names. We celebrate all the Korean customs. We eat Korean food. Of course, we watch K-dramas with them on occasion. And they regularly say that they love being Korean. It just warms my heart when I hear that, especially given the way I grew up. But they're also growing up in a time where there is constant deluge of news all the time about racial incidents and racialized violence that's just flooding their media and social media channels all the time. So whatever positive messages I'm trying to share with them is probably just not enough. And whether parents or churches realize it, our kids are absorbing messages around them all the time that can feed into their self-concept and their understanding about issues of race and ethnicity. Author and psychologist Beverly Daniel Tatum says, cultural racism is like smog in the air. Sometimes it's so thick it's visible, but other times it's less apparent. But always day in and day out, we're breathing it in. So even if I've been really, really intentional communicating to my kids, or we are trying to communicate to our kids in the church, that they are loved as they are, that they're created beautifully in God's image, with whatever particular ethnic heritage they carry, even so, the fallenness of our cultural context can infect us and wound us and our kids, sometimes in ways we can't even see. Now, in the past year, we've seen a lot of people use this phrase, that racism is a virus. And the racial brokenness around us actually is really similar to COVID in some ways. Not in all ways, but in some ways it's hidden, oftentimes, It's invisible in terms of how it can infect us and sicken us and cause harm. Of course, the after effects, of course, of having the virus of racism, it can come out in very harmful and violent and deadly ways, however. And at the core, racism in all of its forms is sin. It stems from sin. It stems from the brokenness of our world and the brokenness in each one of us. And Lord willing, although we will hopefully overcome COVID sometime soon in this lifetime, racism and racial brokenness, it's not going away this side of eternity. So just like we're trying to safeguard ourselves and take measures against COVID-19, we need to do the same with racism and racial injustice. So what are some ways we can do so? I'm going to offer you 3 very brief suggestions today. Number 1, we're going to wear masks of vigilance. Vigilance, it doesn't just happen. It's something we actively have to pursue, just like putting on a mask every day. And previously, many of us didn't really have to engage with issues of race if we didn't want to. In fact, there's a lot of pressure within the church from certain segments not to talk about it. Don't talk about race. That's divisive. Let's be colorblind. Let's be united in Christ. But if we do that, if we don't vigilantly address the issues, then the church and our communities will just continue to be infected with it. When my eldest son, Jason, was on a Little League team, he experienced some racial bullying that ended up leading to moments on social media where some of these boys started putting racial taunts on his page. So I took a screenshot and I sent that over to the coach. And I said, you have to know this is happening. This behavior is happening on your own team. And actually, we are lucky. The coach is a Latino man, and he had experienced a little bit or heard a little bit about the same kind of behavior happening to his son. But now he has some substantive proof and was able to take that incident to the Little League board, and those boys were suspended for a few games. A couple weeks later, one of the moms came to me, and she actually thanked me for letting them know that this was happening because she had no idea. And she said, I don't know where he ever got the idea that this kind of language is acceptable. He got the idea because racism is all around us. It's in the infected air everybody breathes in this country. And the origins of this infection is spiritual. Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 13, offers us a really famous description of how we're to prepare ourselves in the face of evil. And it identifies that we're in a battle against the powers of darkness. So this kind of work, this anti-racist work we are trying to do, it is spiritual work. We are battling against the powers of darkness in this world. And so it requires us to put on the full armor of God, including our masks of vigilance, because Satan wants it to just remain invisible, so we don't really do anything about it. But that's not the reality. We have to be vigilant against it. Secondly, we're going to inoculate ourselves with lament. Soong-Chan Rah is a professor at North Park Seminary. Soon he'll be going to Fuller Seminary, but he wrote this wonderful book, Prophetic Lament, in which he says, lament is the truth-telling we need that allows and in fact demands that the voice of suffering be brought front and center. Although I talk about issues of race and ethnicity with my kids all the time, I feel like what really had the most impact on them this past year was when they saw me weeping at the thought of all the racial violence that was happening to Black Americans as we were praying together as a family. I just couldn't help it. I just started sobbing. And I think it was really important for them to see me wrestling without answers, but just coming before God and just laying it all before him and saying, God, heal our broken nation. And I've noticed since then, they seem to have even more of a sense of wanting to pray for those who are suffering from racial violence and taking that initiative with their own prayers to God. Lament does that. It puts us in that proper posture of submission to God. And as we cry out to God to make things right, As we express solidarity with those who are suffering, our hearts become tender and we become more inoculated against that virus of racism. Now, no one likes to get inoculated. It does hurt. Sometimes we need the pain of that inoculation in order to get better and protect ourselves from deeper harm. Thirdly, I would like to encourage us to pursue herd multi-ethnicity, not herd immunity, although we need that too from COVID, but herd multi-ethnicity. And what do I mean by that? In 2019, we got a puppy. This is Simba, and this is my first dog ever, our family's first dog ever. And if you've ever had a puppy, you know socialization is so key for those first 6 months of life. That dog needs to meet with all kinds of other dogs and people too. And this is true for humans as well. In the book Nurture Shock by Poe Bronson and Ashley Merriman, there are so many studies that they cover about the topic of race, but the most interesting one is that a diverse setting alone does not actually guarantee that people will grow up with multi-ethnic relationships. So if we're living in a diverse town and our kids are going to schools that are diverse or going to churches that are diverse, conventional wisdom says, oh, they're going to become diverse in their lifestyle because they're around so many diverse people. But that's actually not what happens. In fact, one study showed that the more diverse the school, the more the kids self-segregated by race and ethnicity. And so the likelihood that kids would actually have friendships of different races went down. So it's not actually about diverse context. It's about intentionally pursuing multi-ethnic relationships. And that herd multi-ethnicity, that intentionality, is what can help us over time develop the kind of relationships that will help the church stand against racial brokenness and prejudice. I want to end with this amazing picture from Revelation 22 of the tree of life and the river that goes through it, and the fruit on the tree of life bearing 12 crops each month, with the leaves of the tree being for the healing of the nations. And I was so intrigued by this picture because the healing is not even accomplished all the way here in Revelation 22, not yet. It's because we just need that unpolluted, clear air of God's light and love and holiness, in which there's no darkness, no evil, and no hidden virus called racism that exists any longer. That's the only way that we and all the nations can truly heal. And until then, we have our work cut out for us. So I wish you perseverance and peace as you mobilize your churches and your families to be race-wise. Thank you so much.